bring you War and Peace play-by-play. We will be using the second edition rules with some optional rules. Now for one, I like this game because it's a simple game, and if you just want to recreate some Napoleon battles, emphasis being put on supply lines, then this is the game for you. It's not too hard. I'm not an expert at it, but I do enjoy playing the maneuvering aspect of the game, where you're trying to outmaneuver the opponent. I own about 4 general magazines, and they add a lot of optional rules, and if you add all those optional rules, the game can become very complex. And I don't add all those rules, but here are some I do add. In the second edition rule book, there's optional rules I will be using. We use V, the French Imperial Guard rule, and when that comes into play, I'll explain it. When we use W, Russian patriotism, when that comes into play, I'll explain it. And we use demoralized combat, and when that comes into play, I'll explain that one. In the back of the book,
we use the Allied Guards, which Britain, Prussia, and Spain can remove 1 strength point and replace it with 1 strength point that has a guard on it. So I've done that. And then I use the overland to Finland route, and that's where you can march from Sweden to Russia overland. And that's it for the optional rules in the book. Then I'm using some homemade play-by-mail rules, and that keeps me from rolling the dice for every country, every stack of units. And what that does is it's automatic setup of how many strength points you lose depending on who you are, depending on if you're French, and it's already itemized for the attrition and forced march without rolling. Also, in the reinforcement phase, when you roll to see if you double your production points, you have to get a 6. I don't do that. Just every January and every July, every army, every major power will double their production points. So those are the rules set in place for that. That should help me. We'll see. Then in the Avalon Hill General Magazine, Volume 23, Number 4, we use the Spain Special Rule, which states that if Spain attacks France, then Spain does not get its special production rules if the French then beat the Spanish back and invade their country. And you can read it, and it lasts for 12 months. Spain only gets its special production points if it is invaded first. But more importantly, no friendly foreign power may ever occupy more Spanish cities than the Spanish units actually occupy themselves. So there's 18 cities. That means the French, a friendly power, could only occupy up to 9 cities before it would put Spain in the anti-French alliance table. And then we use French manpower, which is, I'll discuss that when we come to it. That don't happen until 1813. The English production points we use, and that is these may be shipped to any friendly or neutral major power, except those conquered within the last year. Then I used land rear, which means the Austrians and the Prussian production cities used to produce land rear, that's the black symbols, are not in play at the start of the game, because if you read the rule, they explain why. So those production cities do not count toward the French alliance table. The Austrian land rear will not start till June 1808, and the Prussians will not start until they are defeated twice. In the General Magazine, Volume 19, Number 5, we use the correction rules for the war at sea. And that's at page 17. That means where it says the Spanish Navy is restricted to Mapboard 1 and the Russian, Danish, and Swedish to the Baltic Sea, that is not correct, they can go anywhere they want. The transports, they do not just carry one strength point, they can carry two. And then F4C goes on to explain what a naval battle is and what fleets and units at sea mean. And then they have a optional battle damage table for naval combat, which reflects the new captured naval unit rules that is found on page 17. So I use this table also. In the General Volume 21, number 2, I use the optional rules on page 40, which states that the cavalry, if you wish to use your cavalry in a battle, you can just say I'm doing a cavalry charge and you get a +1 modifier to your battle. And then reinforcing battles, if you can reinforce a battle where you have one hex separating your original hex that the battle started and your reinforcing hex, that'll be called an outflank, and you will get a +1 attack for that also. And that is it on the optional rules.
Now let's discuss the Austrians' strategy first. Now the situation is this. Napoleon wanted to do away with England once and for all. He was gathering all his troops on the English coast, or the English Channel. And the English responded by collecting allies, which is known as the Third Coalition. And he got Russia and Austria on their side. The Austrians responded by marching an army with Mack and Ferdinand up into Bavaria, and Charles was heading to northern Italy. So the French responded. They took their army from the Channel, turned around, and with extraordinary speed, they came upon Mack and overwhelmed him. This is where we start our battle. There's basically three things I believe the Austrians can do. One, they use this force here and whatever reinforcements they can get out of Budapest and Vienna, and they try to slow down the French through the Danube Valley. While Charles secures Innsbruck with John and heads into northern Italy, maybe taking Milan, even heading into France and capturing a major city, which is going to help the English on the alliance table. The Russians will come in and defend Vienna. Now the other option is to do basically the same thing with Ferdinand and Mack and the reinforcements to try to slow down the French while the Russians defend Vienna. But Charles, instead of heading out toward northern Italy or even France's territory, they hold up in Innsbruck in the mountain region here. See this area? And from here, they can strike across in the Danube Valley area, cutting the French supply, hindering them from getting to Vienna. And then the French are going to have to deal with this army sitting over here on their flank before they really deal with Vienna. Now the third approach, and which is the approach I take, you'll find I do things in all my games. I don't know if you've seen my Global War Third Reich video. I'm very methodic. I'll fight it out, slow paced,
and not take high risk gambles.
And that's why in this one, I believe that the Austrians should use everything they have, including Charles's army, to come here in the Danube Valley and slow down the French, while the Russians get their whole army here at Vienna, and then the Austrians and the Russians make a final stand at Vienna in one big battle, which they should have about a 50% chance of winning. That's my idea. And that's the one I'll be doing here with the Austrians. And that'll be basically the Austrians' strategy to start this game. But aggressive players, or players that like to, be put more pressure on the French should definitely try taking Charles in a more offensive role. I will not. So as far as starting setup for the Austrians, everything has to start in the where they're at, except for the Ferdinand and Mac. They have to start within 1 hex of Ulm. And that's why we break this down into 3 hexes. According to the article, you break it down into 6 factors each, and 5 factors where the cavalry is, and you have 3 mobile forces that can maneuver. And then it takes the French a little more and a bigger force to actually surround that army, putting them on 3 different hexes. Now with Charles here, I put 3 strength points under the command of Hiller to hold Venice, and Charles is going to head back to the Danube. That just gives me another option to deal with whatever Messina does, or to block Messina from tying down Charles. Charles can start within 1 hex of Venus. And again, of Venice. Sorry. And again, depending on what your plan is, you may put him north of Venice, here, or west. I start him east because my idea is to get him back to the Danube Valley here. Now remember, in the campaign game here, the English, and it's a 2-player game, so the English player wants to get the Prussians in this game as fast as they can. The French are trying to prevent the Prussians from coming in. So the Austrians' play should be to try to make the French take as long as they can to get Vienna. And that's why we're doing the delay method down the Danube and making the French take a long time. If you don't use Charles's army to help in the valley, yeah, he's going to probably take Milan and even get into France, but I think it'll take Napoleon 3 to 4 turns to wipe out Vienna. And that's too quick. We can't have that. We want it to take 5 or 6 turns. So that's the Austrian setup. Now the Russians, for their part, in a 2-player game, is to do whatever they can to help the Austrians or the Prussians in their fight against the French. So the Russian starting positions are right here, and they're going to move on to Vienna here as fast as they can. And remember, they have to cover a supply line. The supply line has to be a supply source, which would be any major city in Russia or a satellite country of Russia. And every 3 hexes you'd have to leave a infantryman. I mean, you could leave a cavalry too, but you have to leave a friendly unit to keep the line going. The only other thing we're going to do for the builds, to try to build more troops where their production cities are, which would be Kiev, which would be Moscow, and up here at St. Petersburg, and then try to funnel them into Austria is a waste of time. It's too late. This is basically the army you're going to have before Vienna should fall. So the rest of your builds is you're just trying to build up your entire force pool, which is right there for now, and you'll get stuff added, but there's probably 25 infantry there. Get the entire force pool build up, because you're always going to plan on 2 things in this 2-player game. To, like I said, to help the Austrians, help the Prussians, and defend yourself against a French invasion. And the English are always going to want the Russians to do one of those 3 things. And so they want to keep the Russians on their side. Now, aside from that, building up troops up here at St. Petersburg and invading Sweden would be the other thing the Russians are going to do, and which they will work on right away. Because what's very important that the Swedish have is this transport and a fleet. You see, the Russians already have a transport and a fleet that are going to help the British against the French. But the fleets in this game are very important. You have the Swedish transport and fleet, you have the Danish transport and fleet, and you have the Portugal transport and fleet, which is already on the English side. But the French and the English would definitely want the Danish and the Swedish on their side. So the Russians will take care of getting Sweden out of the game. So that'll be the other thing they'll concentrating on. Other than that, not much to do for the Russians. We can just state for now, I don't really have to go over the Prussians. They are in a starting position, and they cannot move from that starting position, an optional rule we've already used, or I've already talked about. And they'll stay in that position until they join the battle. When they join the battle, then we can discuss what their strategy would be. But for now, they just stay right where they're at. And we have the Spanish. So Spain, under the alliance rules for the campaign game, item number I states, as long as the French do not put in more than 20 ground factors and no Spanish unit moves, the English cannot attempt to change the alliance of Spain.
So English production points, in contrast to the optional rule that I stated at the beginning of the game, can be used against Spain if the French violate these two rules.
So we don't like to do anything with Spain until, I believe, Austria and Prussia are at least conquered for the most part, and then we'll start activating Spain to take out Portugal. But by then, we'll make sure there's French ground units in Spain. According to the optional rule, Spain, that I've showed you in the beginning, I can control less than half of the Spanish cities. So I can occupy 9 Spanish cities with the French, which I will do. And then we go after the English. But if the Spanish change sides, then at least I got some cities already under my control. And that's basically it with the Spanish. I'll discuss the Spanish Navy. Now remember, it's only land units I can't move. We'll discuss the Spanish Navy when we move on to the French Navy. Now, we are going to move to the English. The English setup is pretty standard according to the rules, except for Admiral Nelson and 1 fleet. It can be set up anywhere in the Mediterranean Ocean. Now, what happens on the first turn between the navies of the French and the English is going to decide the next few years of the game. And there's a couple ways to go. There's more than a couple, but I'm just going to discuss the 2 that I think are very good strategies if you pursue them. One is to not risk the life of Nelson and the 1 fleet getting in a battle with the French 3 fleets, and station them with the fleet at Cartagena or the Gibraltar. Now, the rule is for the Gibraltar is if you have a strength point and 1 fleet on it, the Spanish can't attack it. And that's why the Spanish have set up the cavalry within reach of Gibraltar, because if he takes this fleet to come out and fight, the cavalry, Spanish cavalry, can attack Gibraltar and take it. Now, if the English lose Gibraltar, the French can very easily, they already control all these major cities on the coast, they can very easily take the ones here in Austria, and then the Mediterranean would be a French lake. The English can't do anything about it. They can't help Austria with strength points or nothing like that. So that would be a blow to the English. That's why I do not advise using the Gibraltar fleet. Now, if it comes out to intercept, yes, it has like a 60% chance that it will get turned back and go back to the Gibraltar. The other thing is when you put Nelson and this fleet with Cartagena, and you come out to intercept with this,
and it succeeds, now you have 2 fleets against the French 3 with Admiral Nelson. You're more likely to win that naval encounter. However, the chances of you making that interception because you're starting in a port is less. So, if you're an aggressive player, what you can try to do is set up Nelson and the fleet in the Mediterranean and intercept the French fleet as it moves out. You try to take this fleet and attempt an interception, and the Gibraltar fleet and attempt an interception. You have to name all interceptions at the same time. You can't wait to see if one fails and so on. But the chances of these two succeeding is not very high, so you try them both. In that case, if one fails, you have a greater chance of the other one succeeding. 2 chances of 2 succeeding, so you're hoping one makes it. If they both fail the interception, you're left with Admiral Nelson and the 1 fleet going up against the French fleet. Really try to avoid. According to our results table, you need a 5 or a 6 to intercept, but if you're already in the C zone, you get to add 1, and then Admiral Nelson will add 1, so you're adding 2. So really you only need a 3, 4, 5, or 6 to succeed that interception. So let's just say Nelson and the 1 fleet succeed in attacking. The odds will be 2 to 1 in favor of the French. So what risk do you want to take as the English? And what we're going to do, just for the sake of gameplay, is we're going to attempt all the interceptions I just talked about. And we're going to do like a best out of 7. And we're going to see how many times a certain interception succeeds. And then we're going to go with that. And that way you know when you play this game against somebody, you're going to know that majority of the time you're going to succeed in an interception situation. So we will do that, and we're going to start the game with the English out here in the Mediterranean. We'll see him intercept, and then we're going to attempt these 2 fleets in Gibraltar and Cartagena to intercept, and we'll see how many times they succeed out of 7 tries. And then we'll conduct the battle. And then when we're done with that, we're going to take Nelson and the fleet, and we're going to stack them with the Cartagena force, and then we're going to take this force and intercept only the French fleet and see how many times we can succeed in that interception. And then the ensuing naval battle. And then whatever favors the best out of 7 results, that's the one you should do when you play your game. Now, other than that, the British are very interested in the sea and controlling the sea. That's why it's very important this first naval turn. They already have the transport and the naval unit from Portugal. They get that on their side. The Russians have a transport and a fleet that the English can use. The only ones left are the ones in Denmark and Sweden. So those are going to be prizes that the Allies and the French are going to want to go after. Because the English don't want those ships falling in the French hands, and the French don't want those falling in the English hands. If the French lose this battle on the first turn, well, they might get a second chance, maybe, but it's pretty much good riddance for the French, and the English can do what they want. The English, having control of the sea, are going to want to do 2 things. First, you run production points to Prussia, Russia, or Austria to help on the alliance table, to get them to switch sides, and to help them build their troops fast. Especially if they're been conquered, they can't join the war again until all their armies have been built. So the English wants to speed up that production very fast. The other thing the English will do is this. The quickest way to destroy the French fleets, when they're blockaded, you can't touch them. So let's say this force is blockaded right here. We know that. Well, the French have 1, 2, 3. They only have 4 men here. The English have 2 transports. Again, you got a Portugal, maybe a Russian, and with our optional rule, you can transport 2 men on a transport. So those will bring over 4 men. If you bring over 4 men and a leader, land them on the coast, then you attack the French army. If you can take the city, the French fleets become captured. So that's what the English will be looking to do, and how to take the French. Now, a French player should be very aware of this fact and always pay attention to how many transports are in the English control. And first turn of builds, you know, I like to just beef up these ports a little bit because I don't want the English taking the French fleet, especially if I can break out of the Mediterranean Sea and I don't get stopped by Nelson. Then it's on. So that's the English strategy. It all depends on this first turn what happens down here. And then lastly, we'll continue with the French strategy. Now let's discuss the French. Now pretty much on land, the basic strategy for the French is to overwhelm Ferdinand and Mack here, get down the Danube, take Vienna and Budapest. And we have to watch in case the Prussians come in. So I like to keep these 2 forces up here. Maybe my first reinforcement phase or second reinforce up here. We want to force these armies back because as we're running down the Danube, we don't want them getting in our flank. Innsbruck is a production city and so is Prague. However, with the optional rule of the Landwehr, they don't come into play till 1808, so they don't do me any good. The only other thing I can do to try to get the alliance table in my favor, because right now you get powers for points, city points, and victory points. Well, the French receive no victory points at all in the campaign game, according to the campaign game rules. In the scenarios they do, and in the basic rules, any army that is forced to retreat that has 5 strength points or more, and you occupy that hex, you get victory points. But in the campaign game, the French get none. And then city points are, of course, production cities belonging to enemy major states. So it would only be Vienna and Budapest. Now the anti-French, they do get victory points for
the basic game rule of any French army with 5 strength points or more that the coalition can occupy at the end of the combat phase, that same hex, he gets a victory point. So we're always going to be looking to conquer a French or French ally unit of 5 strength points or more. And they also get the victory points for
causing Napoleon to retreat with 5 strength points or more. They get 3 victory points for that, so we got to watch for that. So as of right now, the anti-French have 3 powers, the pro-French have 2. So it's in the English favor. We want to try to get something that's in the neutral, which is mainly the minor city-state groups. The way that works is, for example, the Baltic minor state groups. If you control the production city of Copenhagen, the production city for Poland of Warsaw, and the production city for Sweden of Stockholm, you get this Baltic minor state group on your side, but you have to control all 3. So the only one I'm close to right now is Northern Italy, or the Italian minor states. I already have Milan. What I'm going to try to get is Naples, and I already have Switzerland. So I need Dalmatia and Naples. it has to be regular French forces that occupies the production city. So I start the game owning Florence with regular French troops. So even though it's not considered a French ally at the beginning, as soon as the game starts, it becomes mine. So I do have Naples, Northern Italy, and Switzerland now. All I need is Dalmatia. I need Trieste production city to get that. That is right there. So I'm going to try to take that, and if I can get the alliance table turned to my favor, or at least even it out, make it equal, then the English can't get Prussia in on the war. So that's basically my ground land forces, what they're doing. Now again, a lot of this stuff all depends what happens on the first turn of the naval encounter. What we're going to try to do is break out of the sea and attack one single British fleet that is blockading the Spanish fleet and free it up so we can get more fleets on our side and work our way up here and threaten England and stop the English from sending production points to Prussia, Austria, or Russia. So that's the strategy.